If Sukuna had used his domain at the start of the battle against Mahoraga, Mahorga would have died. Now the reason I say this is, first, there's a lot of things in regard to this breakdown of this video. Obviously I'm going to be talking in specific the Sukuna versus Mahoraga fight. However, people have different interpretations of how the fight went. Some people believe Mahoraga did well. I myself believe Sukuna was just trolling the individual and he was more just playing around with Mahoraga, similar to that we've done in previous fights. Before I start off with the initial breakdown, I want to give plenty of examples of Sukuna's nature, especially in that with fights. In the fight against the finger bearer, his whole process and how he was acting was extremely cocky and condescending, and he was playing around with the finger bearer to showcase his dominance. In the fight against Megami, he showed similarities with the exact same thing, with telling him to get better, show him things to pique his interest. The whole fight was him trolling around, him playing around with him, and even allowing him to take hits on him to find out how strong his Shikigami were. Now we get the fight against Jogo and we see similar things with him, obviously playing around with him, trash talking, even at the end where he decides to use the flames to overpower the lava curse to show his dominance. And now we get to the fight against Mahoraga. First, one key information is Mahoraga only hit Sukuna twice. But let's begin with the start of the fight when they both are starting together. The first time we see Mahoraga hit Sukuna is when he uses Divergent Sword. So when he uses Divergent Sword and we get that mini dialogue from Sukuna where he says if he was a cursed spirit he would have been affected. This already takes away some people's avenue of where they say is Sukuna a cursed spirit, because if he was a cursed spirit he would have been a goner due to the positive energy in the sword. As we see straight after, he retaliates with Dismantle, and this is extremely important. The reason for him using Dismantle is the reason why the domain did not kill Mahoraga straight away. Before I get to that part of the section, but to briefly touch upon, at the part when he uses the domain, the key words he says is cleave fits the criteria to take down Mahoraga because it adjusts to the respective user's toughness. But because he says in this small dialogue that he adapts to every type of slashing attack, it already disproves why his domain expansion did not one-shot him. But let's continue with the breakdown and we'll go with the next part of the fight. And we see then Sukuna use Dismantle again, and his quote is, "Its runes have healed, it did something, what's next?" This is another indication to showcase that he's just trying to find out the phenomenon of Mahoraga and he's playing around with it. If this was a more serious battle, we would see him obviously go for the kill straight away, or at least change his persona in terms of how he would deal with him. So once he then gets surprised with the fact that Mahoraga can see his curse technique, we then see Sukuna begin to block and Mahoraga sends him flying through numerous buildings. As he gets through the buildings, you see there is not real much damage taken from him, and it showcases how and what I said with the fact that it was an easy fight for him. He then tries to punch him and Sukuna dodges out of the way with moving his legs in like a tuck roll similar to that with gymnastics. And then he begins to overpower him in just brief hand-to-hand combat. He kicks him in the head, he then grabs onto the top of his head, and he quotes and says "my turn" with a smile on his face, and then sends him down flights of buildings. We see the kick which sends him all the way to the ground, and he's then now finding out the phenomenon in regard to Mahoraga and realizes something to that with Yamato no Orochi, which is similar to basically a mythological of the 8 heads where you cut one head and then it will grow back. So this is when we learn that his ability, incarnation of the 10 sacred treasures, and the wheel represents a complete cycle of harmony which allows him the ability to adapt to each phenomenon. So, what makes Mahoraga's ability so much dangerous is not from the fact that he can just adapt to any phenomenon, but he can adapt to the specific slashing attacks, like was shown in the next panel before he uses Malevolent Shrine. A good example is people say, for example, Maki could defeat Mahoraga because she has different types of sword attacks and etc. to be able to use. But the reason why I say this is probably not going to be apparent unless he has something like his Spirited Spear of Heaven, which can obviously negate curse techniques. Mahoraga can adapt to whatever phenomenon it is. So if Maki uses a sword attack one time and does not kill Mahoraga straight away, he would then be able to adapt to different type of sword attacks based on the understanding from what we've seen in this fight. With the fact that Sukuna used different type of slashing attacks, and once we see him now use a domain expansion, his monologue is legit saying that cleave is enough to cut him down in one full swoop. However, he can adapt to every type of slashing attack. That means people such as, for example, Kashimo. Let's say his curse technique is something that enhances his electrical properties. He had already used his curse energy properties of electricity to attack Mahoraga and Mahoraga didn't die. He would then adapt to any ability of electricity in regard to Mahoraga. It's not to the fact that Mahoraga's defense and stuff is overly strong, because both from the punches and kicks from just standing down, he was bleeding already. So then when he uses domain expansion and he cuts up everything in the area, we see Mahoraga on Brink's death, and he goes and then uses the flame to overpower Mahoraga. The reason I say this and why it's very important is because I think there's a misconception with the fact that people think Mahoraga did well in this fight. This is not me to underscale Mahoraga, because Mahoraga's hacks and ability is one of the most broken. But if anything, it showcases how much stronger Sukuna is, and people don't anticipate how strong 15 Finger Sukuna is because he hasn't been pushed in any fight at all. Apart from the brief fight when he was one finger against Gojo where he was getting clowned on, he has not been close to any part where he sweat, even close to any part where he's been in trouble, and this just showcases why Mahoraga's best fundamental thing from the brief indication we've shown, because I do believe there's more to come, comes from his hacks. His hacks allows him to adapt to any phenomenon. So like I've been previously saying, if that means a sword attack, electricity, whatever it is, it will adapt to all those things, and it's why somebody such as Sukuna, who can obviously use these flames that can nuke people, is such a big significance. That will conclude with the breakdown. The breakdown is pretty simple. It's a very 3-4 chapters of the fight. It was Sukuna just trolling Mahoraga through the whole fight, and to find out the phenomenon of obviously Mahoraga, as well as see what would be of interest to that of Megami. We see that in his brief dialogue where he says that if this was me with 3 fingers, I could have potentially lost. It could indicate to us that Sukuna just has so much more in his arsenal, an ability to be able to overpower people even between the 3 fingers and 15 Finger Sukuna. 15 Finger Sukuna had no issue, no problems, and was hit twice in this fight. I understand a lot of misconceptions of people think that he did well in the fight because obviously Sukuna completely stomps people. Well, then you could say the exact same thing with Jogo, because he used an attack of Maximum Meteor that Sukuna said would have given him trouble if it had hit. Now I understand with the fact that Sukuna was hit and sent through buildings, but the damage he taken was nothing of significant damage, nor did he even really break a sweat. He used his domain expansion, realized Mahoraga's regeneration is insane and would soon be complete, and then he uses the flames to overpower him and the match is done. I just want to make this clear because I think there is a misconception that a lot of people think people such as Yuta and, for example, Kashimo can potentially fight Sukuna. Of course, there are narrative implications with the fact that we expect the curse technique to do something, and there's obviously Yuji's statement that he can do something against Sukuna, but until I see it and there's more information shown, I don't think any of those 2 fighters that I have mentioned will be able to do anything of the quick and clean nature of dealing with Mahoraga with limited trouble that Sukuna has. Yuta, for example, has a lot of variety of abilities, but the thing that he does lack is potential the destructive capability to overpower Mahoraga. I do believe he would win, and obviously I did a video of that if you would like to check. However, I'm not going to say it would be of ease compared to the way Sukuna does. And bar Sukuna and obviously Gojo, I don't think any other people currently we've seen in the verse will be able to overpower Mahoraga with that extent. A good example is, for example, if Gojo was to use red or maybe blue, there's a potential he could adapt to those things, but not necessarily purple, which is something that obviously negates durability. So there's certain things, and apart from maybe the Liberation Sword from Maki, which could be wildcards to obviously defeat Mahoraga, with the majority of the verse they have nothing they can do to him, and it's more so of showcasing how powerful 15 Finger Sukuna is, who hasn't even been pushed in any fights at all. But thank you guys for watching. What do you think of this breakdown? Do you agree with my statement that Sukuna would have one-shot him if he had used his domain expansion? And if you don't, let me know your opinions down below. Obviously, make sure to like, comment, share, subscribe, and check out the affiliate links in the description below.